My parents gave my college fund to my stepbrother for his music career. 10 years later, I'm a doctor. They showed up asking for help with medical bills. I handed them his demo CD. Hey Reddit, buckle up for this one because it's a decade in the making and the payoff was absolutely beautiful. I, 32, female, a family medicine physician with my own practice in Portland. But 10 years ago, I was an 18-year-old who just got screwed out of her entire future by parents who thought musical theater was more important than medical school. Here's how it went down. My mom married my stepdad Gary when I was 12. He came with a 15-year-old son named Trevor, who immediately became the golden child of our household. Trevor was this wannabe Broadway star who spent every waking moment singing show tunes and practicing jazz hands in the mirror. Kid had decent pipes, I'll give him that. But he also had the work ethic of a sloth and the ego of Kanye West. Gary was one of those divorced dads trying way too hard to be the cool parent. He'd constantly brag about Trevor's artistic talent and how he was going to be the next big thing on Broadway. Every conversation somehow circled back to Trevor's latest audition or performance. Meanwhile, I was pulling straight A's in AP chemistry and biology, volunteering at the hospital, and already planning my path to medical school. The favoritism was so obvious, it was almost comical. When I got accepted to the National Honor Society, Gary's response was, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Trevor got the lead in the school musical?" When I scored in the 95th percentile on my PATs, Mom clapped politely and then immediately shifted the conversation to how Trevor needed new headshot for his portfolio. Trevor milked the attention for everything it was worth. This kid would break into song during dinner conversations. Not kidding. We'd be discussing grocery lists, and he'd suddenly start belting out Defying Gravity from Wicked like we were his personal audience. Gary would beam with pride while I sat there wondering if this was what having a stroke felt like. The real kicker was how they handled our different activities. My science fair projects. Very nice, dear. Trevor's community theater performances, full family attendance with flowers, and a celebration dinner afterward. I once won first place at the Regional Science Olympiad, and Gary's only comment was asking if we could leave early because Trevor had rehearsal. I remember this one particular instance during my junior year that perfectly encapsulated the family dynamics. I had been working for months on this research project about antibiotic resistance in local water sources, spent weekends at the university lab, did actual field work collecting samples, presented findings that impressed my AP biology teacher enough to nominate me for a state-level science competition. The same week I found out I'd won second place at state, a huge accomplishment that could look incredible on college applications. Trevor auditioned for the lead in the community theater's production of Guys and Dolls. He got a call back. Not the part, a call back. Guess which achievement dominated family dinner conversation for the next month? Gary actually printed out the callback notice and put it on the refrigerator. My state-level science award went in a drawer somewhere, but I figured college would be my escape route. I'd been saving every dollar for my part-time job at the drugstore, 3 shifts a week after school and 8-hour weekend shifts. The work was mind-numbing. Stocking shelves, running the register, dealing with people who couldn't understand why their insurance wouldn't cover their pet's medication. But every paycheck went straight into my college savings account. More importantly, my mom had always promised that my college fund would cover the rest. This wasn't some vague parental promise. This was a real account started by my biological father before he died in a car accident when I was 8. Dad had been an engineer, practical and forward-thinking, and he'd set up an education fund that grew steadily over the years through conservative investments. By my senior year, it had grown to about $85,000. Not enough for Harvard Medical School maybe, but plenty to get me through undergraduate without debt and give me a solid foundation for medical school applications. I had my whole timeline mapped out. 4 years at Oregon State for pre-med, maintain a high GPA, score well on the MCATs, get accepted to Oregon Health and Science University, complete residency, and finally become Dr. Joanne Mitchell. That's where I screwed up. I assumed having a dead father's money set aside specifically for my education meant it was actually mine. The bomb dropped during spring of my senior year, right in the middle of college decision season. I was researching medical schools, comparing pre-med programs, getting ready to accept my spot at Oregon State. had been accepted to several schools, but Oregon State offered the best combination of academic reputation and in-state tuition. I was in my room studying for AP Calculus finals when Mom knocked on my door with that fake sweet voice she used when she was about to deliver bad news. The same tone she'd used to tell me we couldn't afford the senior class trip to Washington, D.C., or that I couldn't get a car for my 16th birthday because money was tight. Honey, we need to talk about college. I figured she wanted to discuss meal plans or dorm room assignments, maybe ask about my class schedule or campus orientation. Boy, was I wrong. Your stepfather and I have been talking, and we've decided to redirect your college fund toward Trevor's career development. I stared at her like she'd started speaking ancient Greek. The words literally didn't compute. What do you mean redirect? Well, Trevor got accepted to that intensive summer program at Juilliard. And then there's the year-long acting conservatory in New York. This is his shot, Joanne. His one opportunity to really make it in the industry. The words hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. I actually felt nauseous. That's my college fund. Dad left that money for my education. Mom's face went all tight and defensive. The expression she always got when she knew she was being unreasonable, but was going to stick to her position anyway. Gary is your father now, and we make decisions as a family. Trevor's dreams are just as valid as yours. Trevor's dreams. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to save lives. He wants to prance around in tights singing show tunes. Don't be so dramatic. There will be other opportunities for you to go to college. Trevor's window is closing. He needs to strike while the iron is hot. Strike while the iron is hot. This about a 20-year-old who had never held a real job, never paid for anything himself, and whose biggest accomplishment was getting cast as chorus member number 3 in the high school production of Oklahoma. You can take out student loans like everyone else, Gary chimed in from the doorway where he'd apparently been eavesdropping. Character building experience. Trevor's artistic development can't wait. Character building, right? Because working 3 jobs to pay for medical school while Trevor lived it up in Manhattan pursuing his art was exactly what my father had in mind when he started that college fund. I tried every argument I could think of. The money was from my father, not Gary. I had actual career prospects with clear earning potential, while Trevor was chasing a pipe dream in an industry where 90% of actors are unemployed at any given time. Medical school was expensive and competitive. I needed that financial foundation to have any realistic shot at success. Nothing worked. Gary had convinced my mom that Trevor was the family's best investment, their ticket to fame and fortune. One successful Broadway show, and he'll be set for life, he kept saying. Meanwhile, doctors are a dime a dozen. Doctors are a dime a dozen. This from a guy who managed a Jiffy Lube franchise and thought having your oil changed every 3,000 miles was the height of automotive sophistication. The conversation went in circles for 2 hours. Gary kept talking about return on investment and supporting artistic talent. Mom kept insisting this was what families do for each other and that I was being selfish for not understanding Trevor's needs. I kept pointing out that this was literally theft, taking money specifically designated for one person's education and giving it to someone else entirely. Finally, Gary dropped the real bomb. The decision's already been made. We've spoken to the financial advisor and begun the transfer process. Trevor's program starts in June, so we needed to act quickly. They hadn't consulted me, hadn't asked for my input, had already started moving my money to fund Trevor's fantasy before they'd even bothered to tell me about it. The worst part was watching Trevor's reaction when they told him. Kid didn't even have the decency to feel guilty. He just started researching New York apartments and talking about how he'd thank the family in his Tony Award acceptance speech. Don't worry, Joanne, he said with this patronizing smile that made me want to throw something at his head. When I make it big, I'll help pay for your medical school. Think of this as an investment in both our futures. An investment in his Broadway dreams, using my dead father's money. I locked myself in my room for the rest of the day, alternating between rage and despair. Everything I'd worked for, every plan I'd made, every sacrifice I'd endured, all of it depended on that college fund. Without it, medical school became exponentially more difficult, maybe impossible. That summer was brutal in ways I hadn't expected. While Trevor was living it up at his Juilliard program, posting Instagram stories from trendy Manhattan cafes and networking events, I was working double shifts at the drugstore and applying for every scholarship, grant, and loan I could find. The financial aid office at Oregon State became my second home. Mrs. Patterson, my guidance counselor, helped me navigate the maze of applications and requirements. She knew my situation and was quietly furious about it, though she tried to stay professional. "There are options," she told me during one of our meetings. Spread across her desk were scholarship applications, loan paperwork, and work-study program descriptions, merit scholarships, need-based aid, work-study programs, student loans. It won't be easy, but it's doable. What she didn't say, but we both knew, was that it would be a hell of a lot harder than it needed to be. Students with family support could focus on academics and extracurriculars. Students like me would be working 30 hours a week just to survive. I ended up cobbling together a financial aid package that covered about 60% of my costs. Academic scholarships covered tuition partially. Need-based aid helped with room and board, but there was still a significant gap. The rest came from working nights at a 24-hour diner near campus, the Sunrise Cafe, where I served coffee and pie to drunk college students and shift workers from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 3 nights a week. My freshman year schedule looked like something designed by a sadist. Classes during the day, study time in the afternoon, work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., sleep for 4 hours, repeat. I lived on vending machine coffee and whatever free food I could scourge from the diner, day-old muffins, soup that was about to be thrown out, the occasional sandwich from a sympathetic cook. Meanwhile, Trevor was posting Instagram stories from trendy Manhattan cafes, talking about his artistic journey and networking with other aspiring performers. The $85,000 that should have been securing my education was funding his coffee shop meetings, acting classes, and what looked like a pretty active social life. My grades suffered that first year, not badly. I maintained a 3.4 GPA, but it wasn't the 3.8 I'd planned on. Hard to excel academically when you're running on 4 hours of sleep and your biggest meal of the day is often a granola bar between classes. But I adapted, found study groups that met during hours I was awake, formed relationships with professors during office hours when most other students were socializing, discovered that medical school admissions committees actually looked favorably on applicants who'd worked their way through college. It demonstrated dedication and work ethic that trust fund kids couldn't match. Trevor's updates from New York became increasingly sporadic and vague. The Juilliard summer program went well, but the year-long conservatory was apparently more challenging than he'd expected. His Instagram posts shifted from artistic revelations to complaints about the competitive nature of New York theater, the cost of living, and the difficulty of getting noticed among so many talented performers. Gary kept making excuses during our occasional family phone calls. He's finding his artistic voice. The New York scene is tough to break into. He just needs more time to establish himself in the industry. What Trevor actually needed was a job, but that was apparently beneath him. The few times I spoke with him directly, he'd complain about auditions where he didn't get callbacks, expensive classes that weren't delivering the promised results, and the general difficulty of making it as an artist in New York. By my sophomore year, I'd found my rhythm. Better time management meant better grades. I brought my GPA up to 3.7. The diner work was still exhausting, but I'd been promoted to shift supervisor, which meant slightly better pay and more predictable hours. I'd also started tutoring other students in organic chemistry, which paid better than restaurant work and looked good on medical school applications. Trevor, meanwhile, had moved from the expensive Manhattan apartment to a shared place in Brooklyn. The updates from New York became less frequent, and when he did post on social media, it was usually about the struggle of being an artist, rather than actual accomplishments. Junior year brought both opportunities and challenges. I'd started volunteering at the campus health center, getting hands-on experience with patient care that would be invaluable for medical school applications. The volunteer coordinator, Dr. Martinez, became an informal mentor, helping me understand the medical school application process and even writing one of my recommendation letters. But junior year also brought the news that Trevor was moving back home. The New York experiment had officially failed after 3 years and most of my college fund. He was 23, broke, and moving back into his childhood bedroom like nothing had happened. Gary spun it as regrouping for his next phase and bringing valuable industry experience back to the local market. What it actually meant was that Trevor had spent $85,000 of my inheritance and had nothing to show for it except stories about auditions he didn't book and connections that didn't lead anywhere. The family dynamics at holiday gatherings were uncomfortable. Trevor would regale everyone with stories of his time in the industry, named dropping actors and directors he'd met briefly at networking events. Meanwhile, I was pulling 16-hour days between classes, work, and volunteering, preparing for the MCATs, while everyone else was focused on Trevor's tales from the Big Apple. Senior year was crunch time. Medical school applications, MCAT prep, maintaining grades, and still working enough hours to pay for basic living expenses. I took the MCAT twice. The first score was good, but not great. The second attempt was much better after months of studying with borrowed prep books and free online resources. Medical school interviews were their own kind of torture. Professional clothes I couldn't afford, travel expenses that ate into my grocery budget, the stress of competing against applicants whose parents could afford test prep courses and application consultants. But somehow it worked. I got accepted to Oregon Health and Science University, my dream school. Excellent reputation and relatively affordable for in-state students. Not a full scholarship, but manageable with loans and the part-time work I'd planned to continue during medical school. 4 years later, I graduated from Oregon State summa cum laude with a 3.9 GPA in biochemistry. Not bad for someone who'd been working 25 to 30 hours a week throughout college and living off vending machine dinners and day-old pastries from the diner. Medical school was even harder without family support. While other students could focus purely on studies, I was working weekends at urgent care clinics as a medical scribe, tutoring organic chemistry to undergraduates, and doing medical research for faculty members who paid graduate student rates for data analysis. The loans were terrifying. Each semester brought new promissory notes, new debt totals, new calculations of how long it would take to pay everything back. By graduation, I owed about $250,000, manageable for a doctor's salary, but still a mountain of debt that would follow me for decades. Throughout medical school, I kept tabs on Trevor through social media and family gossip. He'd gotten a job at a music store in town, was occasionally performing in local community theater productions, and still lived at home with Mom and Gary, still talking about his music career like he was just temporarily between major opportunities. The contrast was stark. I was learning to diagnose heart attacks and deliver babies, working 80-hour weeks during clinical rotations, preparing to save lives and contribute meaningfully to society. Trevor was selling guitar picks and auditioning for dinner theater productions of Grease. I graduated medical school with honors and started my residency in family medicine at Portland General. 3 years of brutal schedule, overnight shifts, emergency department rotations, learning to handle everything from routine checkups to life-threatening emergencies. But I loved it. Every difficult case, every complicated diagnosis, every patient I helped, it all felt worth it. During residency, the family updates became more concerning. Trevor had been laid off from the music store and was working part-time at Guitar Center. Still living at home, still pursuing his dreams, but now approaching 30 without any real career prospects or life skills. Gary's health had been declining. Too much stress, poor diet, and what looked like undiagnosed heart problems he kept ignoring. Mom was working part-time at a dental office, but not making enough to really support 3 adults, especially with Trevor contributing virtually nothing to household expenses. I finished residency and opened my own practice, family medicine, in a nice Portland suburb, slowly building a patient base, finally making real money for the first time in my adult life. The practice was everything I dreamed of: helping families, treating children and elderly patients, being the kind of doctor who actually listened and took time with each patient. My student loans were finally manageable with a doctor's salary. I'd rented a small house with a garden, bought a reliable car, started thinking about actually building a life instead of just surviving until the next exam or loan payment. Trevor, meanwhile, was 31 and still living in his childhood bedroom, working retail part-time and occasionally posting on Facebook about upcoming projects that never materialized. Then the call came. I was in my office reviewing patient charts on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Mom called, crying hysterically. Gary had been having chest pains for weeks, but ignored them because he didn't have time to be sick, the classic male response to concerning symptoms. Finally collapsed at the Jiffy Lube during the morning shift and was rushed to the hospital. Heart attack, A major one, according to the emergency department physician who'd called Mom with updates. The doctors are saying he needs surgery, Mom sobbed into the phone. Multiple bypasses, and they want to keep him in intensive care for at least a week. My medical training kicked in immediately. I asked about his symptoms, timeline, what the cardiologists were saying about prognosis and treatment options. Started mentally calculating recovery time, potential complications, the kind of follow-up care he'd need. How much is this going to cost? I asked, though I already suspected the answer would be devastating. That's when the real problem came out. Gary's health insurance through the Jiffy Lube franchise was basically catastrophic coverage only. High, deductible, limited network, the kind of plan that works fine for routine care, but leaves you bankrupt when something serious happens. They were looking at probably $200,000 in medical bills, and that was if everything went smoothly with no complications or extended recovery time. Gary's plan would cover maybe 40% of that after the deductible was met. Mom was panicking in that particular way that happens when someone who's never dealt with serious financial stress suddenly faces losing everything. They didn't have savings. Most of Gary's income went to supporting Trevor's lifestyle and paying for his various career development expenses. The house had a reverse mortgage Gary had taken out a few years earlier to cover some business expansion that hadn't worked out. They were basically screwed. "We don't know what to do," Mom said, her voice breaking. "We thought maybe since you're a doctor now." There it was, the ask I'd been expecting for years. "You want me to help with the medical bills?" "It's not that we expect you to pay everything," she said quickly, probably realizing how that sounded. "But maybe you could talk to the doctors, work something out, help us figure out payment plans or charity care options." Help them figure out payment plans with the money I'd earned from working my ass off through medical school while they funded Trevor's Manhattan adventure with my inheritance. "I'll think about it," I told her, which was the most non-committal response I could manage. That evening, I sat in my living room, the first place I'd ever lived that I could actually afford to decorate nicely, and really considered what to do. Part of me wanted to help. Despite everything, Gary wasn't a bad person, just a father who'd made incredibly poor decisions about supporting his son. Mom had been weak rather than malicious, letting Gary convince her that throwing money at Trevor's dreams was more important than securing my future. But every time I started feeling guilty about their situation, I remembered sitting in that 24-hour diner at 2 a.m. during medical school, studying anatomy while serving coffee to drunk college students because I couldn't afford to study full-time like my classmates whose parents were supporting them. I remembered eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week because that was all I could afford after paying for textbooks and lab fees. I remembered the constant stress of loan applications, scholarship essays, the exhaustion of working and studying simultaneously, while Trevor posted Instagram stories from expensive restaurants in Manhattan. The next morning, I drove to my childhood home for the first time in 3 years. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, except for Trevor's car in the driveway. A decent Honda Accord that probably cost more than I'd spent on food during my entire medical school experience. The lawn needed mowing. The paint was peeling a bit, but it was still the middle-class suburban home I'd grown up in. I knocked on the door and waited. Trevor answered, looking like he'd just woken up despite it being 11 o'clock a.m. Still had that same entitled expression, though it faltered a bit when he saw me standing there. "Oh, hey, Joanne. Mom's at the hospital with Gary." "I know, I came to see you." He let me in, and I looked around the living room where I'd spent my childhood. Same furniture, same family photos on the walls, including several framed pictures of Trevor in various stage productions over the years. None of my academic achievements were displayed anywhere, I noticed. "This is really scary, you know," Trevor said, settling onto the couch like he was preparing for a long conversation. "Gary's like really sick, and the money situation is totally screwed." "Yeah, I heard. What are you doing to help?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what are you doing to help with the medical bills? You're 31 years old. You live here rent-free. They've supported your career attempts for over a decade. What's your plan for helping them through this crisis?" Trevor shifted uncomfortably, probably not used to anyone asking him to take responsibility for anything. "I mean, I'm working at Guitar Center. I don't exactly have medical bill money lying around, right? But you could get a second job, or maybe a better primary job that actually uses that expensive training they paid for you to get." "It's not that simple. I'm still pursuing my music career. I can't just abandon everything I've worked for." Everything he'd worked for with my college fund. The audacity was breathtaking. Trevor, what happened to the $85,000? What do you mean? My college fund. The $85,000 from my father that was supposed to pay for my education. Where did it go? He had the decency to look uncomfortable, at least. That was like years ago, Joanne. It went to my training, living expenses in New York, networking opportunities, investment in my future, right? And what return did they get on that investment? The silence stretched out between us. Trevor picked at a thread on the couch cushion, suddenly very interested in the upholstery pattern. Look, he finally said, I know you're probably still mad about the college thing, but that worked out fine. You're a doctor now. You made it work. I made it work by accumulating $250,000 in student debt and working 3 jobs throughout medical school. You made it work by spending my dead father's money on acting classes and Manhattan rent. That's not fair. Mom and Gary made that decision as parents. I didn't force them to do anything. No, but you sure didn't object to it either. And you didn't exactly rush to pay it back when your Broadway dreams didn't pan out. Trevor stood up, pacing toward the window in that restless way people do when they're being confronted with uncomfortable truths. What do you want me to say, Joanne? I'm sorry. Fine. I'm sorry it worked out that way, but I can't change the past. And Gary's sick now. This is bigger than old family drama. You're right. This is bigger than old family drama. This is about accountability. I reached into my purse and pulled out a CD, not a burned CD with a handwritten label. This was professionally manufactured with glossy artwork and everything. Trevor's eyes went wide when he saw it. Where did you get that? Your MySpace page from 2018. Remember? You spent about $3,000 of my college fund getting these demo CDs professionally made, posted about it constantly, how this was going to be your breakthrough, how record labels would hear your talent and offer contracts. Trevor's face went red. That was a different phase of my career. I'm more focused on live performance now. Right. Well, I bought a copy off eBay. Figured it was the least I could do since I technically helped pay for it. I set the CD on the coffee table between us and headed for the door. Trevor followed me. Joanne, wait. What are you doing? Are you going to help with Gary's bills or not? I turned around at the door, looking at this 31-year-old man who still lived in his childhood bedroom, who'd spent my inheritance on a failed dream, who was now asking me to bail out the family that had sacrificed my future for his. I'm going to help exactly as much as this family helped me get through medical school. What does that mean? It means you should probably start checking couch cushions for spare change. Maybe sell some of those professional headshots from your portfolio. That evening, Mom called again. Gary's surgery had gone well, but he'd be in the hospital for at least another week. The bills were already mounting, and they'd gotten the estimate for the full treatment cost, $180,000, not including follow-up care and rehabilitation. Did you talk to Trevor? She asked. I did. Interesting conversation. He's still living the dream, apparently. Joanne, please. I know you're angry about the college fund situation, but this is life or death. Gary could die if he doesn't get proper follow-up care. Mom, Gary is going to get proper follow-up care. That's how hospitals work in America. They don't just let heart surgery patients die because of billing disputes. But the debt will destroy us. We'll lose the house. We don't know what to do. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right balance between honesty and cruelty. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to talk to the hospital's financial counselor about payment plans. Every hospital has them. You're going to apply for charity care programs. Most hospitals have sliding scale assistance for people who can't afford treatment. Trevor is going to get a second job, or maybe his first real job, and contribute to household expenses so you can focus on paying medical bills. But Trevor's career is working retail part-time and occasionally performing in community theater. He's 31 years old. It's time to be realistic about his prospects and his responsibilities to this family. You could just help us. You're a doctor. You make good money now. There it was. The entitlement that had defined my entire childhood. The assumption that my success was somehow communal property, while Trevor's failures were just temporary setbacks requiring more investment. You're right. I do make good money. I make good money because I worked my ass off to get through medical school without family support. I make good money because I spent 4 years eating ramen noodles and working nights while my classmates went to study groups funded by parents who could afford to support their children's education. I make good money because I graduated with $250,000 in debt that I'm still paying off. We did what we thought was best at the time. You did what was convenient for your new husband and his son. You sacrificed my future to fund Trevor's fantasy. and now you want me to rescue you from the consequences of that decision. It wasn't a fantasy. Trevor is talented. Mom, Trevor is a 31-year-old man living in his childhood bedroom, working part-time at Guitar Center, whose biggest accomplishment in a decade is a demo CD that no record label ever bothered to listen to. Meanwhile, I'm actually helping people, saving lives, contributing to society in meaningful ways. Which one of us turned out to be the better investment? She was quiet for a long moment. So, you won't help. I'm not giving you money if that's what you're asking, but I'll give you something better. I'll give you the same thing you gave me when I needed support for my education. Advice to figure it out on your own, and good luck making it work. That's cruel. No, Mom. Cruel is taking a teenager's college fund, money specifically left by her deceased father for her education, and giving it to your stepson for acting classes. What I'm doing is justice. I hung up and blocked their numbers. The next few months were surprisingly peaceful. I focused on my practice, which was growing steadily as word spread about the new family doctor who actually listened to patients and took time with appointments. I'd started specializing in preventive care and chronic disease management, finding real satisfaction in helping people maintain their health rather than just treating crises. 2 weeks later, my cousin Jessica called. She'd been hearing through the family grapevine about Gary's situation and my refusal to help and wanted to get my side of the story. Because what I'm hearing from your mom doesn't sound like the Joanne I know, she said diplomatically. I explained everything. The college fund theft, Trevor's failed career funded by my inheritance, the years of favoritism and dismissive treatment, their current expectation that I'd bail them out of the consequences of their own decisions. Jessica was quiet for a moment after I finished. Jesus, Joanne, I had no idea about the college fund thing. That's incredibly messed up. Yeah, well, water under the bridge now. Is it, though? I mean, how do you feel about how this is all playing out? I considered the question carefully. You know what? I'm actually at peace with it. I spent years being angry about what they did to me, but building my career, proving I could succeed without their support, that's been incredibly satisfying. Now they need help, and they're finding out what it feels like when family doesn't come through for the important stuff. What about Gary, though? I mean, he could actually have complications, need ongoing care. Gary isn't going to die, Jessica. They'll work out payment plans with the hospital, maybe qualify for charity care programs, figure something out the way millions of Americans do every year. Hospitals have entire departments dedicated to helping people navigate these situations, but they'll have to do it themselves. And maybe they'll learn what it's like to struggle financially for something important, like I did for 8 years. Jessica understood. She'd watched the family dynamics over the years during holiday gatherings and seen how differently Trevor and I were treated, though she'd never known the extent of it. A month later, I heard through the family network that Gary had been discharged and was recovering well at home. They'd qualified for the hospital's charity care program, which covered about 60% of the costs. The remaining bills were set up on a payment plan over 10 years with reduced interest rates. More importantly, Trevor had gotten a second job working nights at a call center, still lived at home, but was now contributing to household expenses for the first time in his adult life. Apparently, the financial crisis had been a wake-up call about the realistic prospects of his music career. Mom had gone back to work full-time as a dental receptionist, her first full-time job in years. They were managing, but it was tight, with no extra money for Trevor's artistic pursuits or professional development expenses. 6 months after Gary's surgery, Trevor actually reached out to me directly, not through Mom or other family members, but a text from his own phone. Hey, Joanne. I know things have been weird between us, but I wanted to reach out. Gary's recovery is going really well, and I've been thinking a lot about what you said about accountability and responsibility. I got a better job, assistant manager at a music store downtown, not just retail sales, still doing music stuff on weekends, but treating it more like a hobby now instead of expecting it to pay the bills. Anyway, I wanted to say I'm sorry about the college fund thing. I was young and selfish, and I didn't really think about how it affected your life. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what you went through. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever gotten from him. Not perfect, not complete, but honest and specific, rather than the usual non-apology apologies I was used to from my family. I texted back, "Thanks for saying that, Trevor. I'm glad Gary's doing better and that you're taking more responsibility. That means a lot." That was it. No dramatic reconciliation, no return to family dinners, but a kind of peace that felt more valuable than forced forgiveness. Another 6 months passed. My practice continued growing. I'd hired a nurse practitioner to help handle the patient load, and I'd finally paid off my undergraduate student loans. Still had the medical school debt, but it was manageable and decreasing steadily. I was at my office late one evening catching up on patient files and insurance paperwork when I got a call from an unknown local number. Dr. Mitchell, this is Gary. My stepfather's voice was different, quieter, more hesitant than I remembered from my childhood. Hi, Gary. How are you feeling? Much better. The cardiologist says I'm ahead of schedule on recovery. Listen, I was wondering if I could take you to coffee sometime. There are some things I'd like to say, and I don't think I can do them justice over the phone. We met the following Saturday at a neutral location, a coffee shop near my office that I sometimes visited between appointments. Gary looked older, more tired than I remembered, but healthier than I'd expected given the major surgery. I owe you an apology, he started without preamble. Several apologies, actually. I waited, curious to see where this was going. The college fund thing was wrong. Not just misguided or poorly thought out. It was wrong. I convinced your mother it was the right decision for the family, but it wasn't. That money was meant for your education, specifically set aside by your father for that purpose, and we had no right to redirect it. Why did you do it? Gary stirred his coffee for a long moment, clearly thinking about how to answer honestly. Honestly, because I was desperate to prove that supporting Trevor's dreams was the right choice. I'd been divorced, felt like I'd failed at being a father the first time around, and I wanted to show Trevor that I believed in him completely. But I did it at your expense, and that was inexcusable. What about Trevor? Have you talked to him about all this? We've had several long conversations over the past few months. The financial crisis was a wake-up call for him about taking responsibility for his own life instead of expecting other people to fund his dreams. He's been contributing to household expenses, found better employment, started acting like the adult he should have been years ago. I'm glad he's growing up. Joanne, I need you to know your mother never stopped feeling guilty about the college fund decision. She talks about it constantly now. How proud she is that you made it through medical school and built a successful practice despite our lack of support. How much she regrets listening to me about redirecting that money to Trevor. Then why didn't she ever say that to me directly? Pride, I think. And maybe fear that you'd reject the apology or tell us it was too little too late. Gary reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a promissory note. We can't pay you back the full $85,000 all at once, but we've worked out a budget to repay you over 10 years with interest. It's not enough compensation, and it's not soon enough, but it's what we can realistically manage given our current financial situation. I unfolded the document and looked it over. It was detailed and clearly thought out, with monthly payment amounts, interest calculations, and contingency plans if their financial situation changed. The interest rate was actually higher than they needed to offer. You don't have to do this, Gary. Yes, we do. We stole your inheritance and used it to fund a fantasy. Now we're going to pay it back, even if it takes until we're both dead to do it. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. Gary, I want you to know I'm not angry anymore. I was for a long time, furious about what felt like a betrayal. But building my career on my own terms, proving I could succeed without family support, that actually healed something in me. I'm grateful for the struggle in some ways, because it made me stronger and more self-reliant. That doesn't make what we did right. No, but it makes me who I am today, and I like who I've become. We finished our coffee and talked about safer topics, Gary's recovery process, my practice, the weather. Normal conversation between two adults who'd found a way to coexist respectfully. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube, this video deserves to blow up. That coffee with Gary closed a chapter I didn't realize I had been carrying for so long. Walking back to my car that morning, I felt lighter. Not because the past had been erased. Nothing could undo the years of sacrifice, the debt, or the constant grind of proving myself, but because the acknowledgement had finally come. After all those years of silence, dismissiveness, and excuses, someone from that side of my family finally admitted it was wrong. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. I didn't rush back into their lives, and I didn't suddenly start showing up for Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings, but it gave me closure. It allowed me to release the bitterness without excusing what had been done to me. Trevor and I still weren't close, but his occasional texts were civil now. Updates about his job, his little wins, even a thank you once for pushing him to take responsibility. They were small gestures, but for Trevor, they meant growth. Mom never called me directly again. She sent a couple of short, awkward messages through Jessica. Things like, "Tell Joanne I'm proud of her," or "Tell her I think of her often." I didn't respond, but I didn't shut the door either. Some distances don't need bridges rebuilt. They just need acknowledgement that the chasm exists. As for me, I kept building. My practice grew into something solid, with a small staff and a steady roster of patients who trusted me. I was making a difference every day, the very thing I had dreamed about as a teenager when I imagined saving lives and helping people. And whenever doubt crept in, or the weight of student loans felt suffocating, I remembered that demo CD sitting in my desk drawer, a glossy reminder of the inheritance that was stolen, the sacrifices I made, and the fact that I didn't just survive it, I thrived in spite of it. Justice didn't come in the form of repayment or reconciliation. It came in the form of resilience. I had become the doctor my father wanted me to be, and no one could ever take that from me. Years later, I still think about that CD sometimes. It's tucked away in the bottom drawer of my office desk beneath old files and stationery. I've never played it. I don't need to. Just seeing the cover, the forced glamour shot of Trevor looking dramatic in black and white, is enough to remind me of everything I endured and overcame. It isn't bitterness anymore. It's perspective. That disc, bought with the money meant for my future, turned into the symbol of why I refuse to let anyone else dictate my path. Every late night at the diner, every exhausted morning lecture, every anxious glance at my loan balances, it all forged me into the woman I am today. Sometimes patients ask me how I stayed motivated through the hardest parts of medical training. I usually smile and tell them the truth, because I knew no one else was going to do it for me. And that's the lesson I carry, the one my younger self had to learn far too soon. Trevor's life eventually leveled out. Last I heard, he married a woman he met at the music store and they had a baby. He still plays guitar at small local venues, but he treats it as a side passion rather than a career. From the occasional updates I get through Jessica, he's steady, working, and actually providing for his family. Maybe it took everything that happened to get him there, but at least he finally grew up. Gary kept his word with the promissory note. Checks came in every month, modest but consistent, and though I didn't need the money by then, I cashed them anyway. It wasn't about the dollars. It was about the acknowledgement. About finally, after all those years, being treated as if what had been stolen from me mattered. And my mom? I don't think she'll ever really face me again. Maybe guilt is heavier than anger. Maybe silence is her way of living with it. Either way, I've stopped waiting for her to change. Some apologies never come. Some mothers never become the women you need them to be. But I've built my own family now. The patients who trust me, the colleagues who respect me, the friends who have stood by me when blood relatives failed. That's the life I chose. That's the life I earned. And every time I glance at that old CD cover, I whisper to myself with a small smile, "Best investment you ever lost, Joanne," because it made you unstoppable. I didn't keep much from my childhood home. When I moved out for college, I left most of it behind. Yearbooks, old trophies, even the framed certificates no one had bothered to hang. But that CD, that one I chose to keep. Not because I valued it, but because it was proof. Proof that they had gambled my future on someone else's dream. Proof that I had been underestimated, dismissed, and still managed to rise. Some nights, when I lock up my clinic after a long day, I sit in the quiet of my office and think about the arc of it all. How an $85,000 betrayal turned into $250,000 in debt. How that debt turned into relentless drive. And how that drive became a thriving practice, a purpose, and a life that no one could ever claim credit for but me. Do I wish things had been different? Sometimes. I wish my father's gift had been honored. I wish my mother had chosen fairness over favoritism. I wish I had known what it felt like to be believed in instead of sidelined. But wishing doesn't change history. What I have instead is a kind of fierce gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for the strength it forced me to build, for the clarity it gave me about who I am and who I will never allow myself to become. Trevor once told me, back when he was still clinging to his Broadway fantasy, that pain was the fuel of every great artist. Maybe he was right, just not in the way he imagined, because my pain didn't write songs or scripts. It built a life. It healed people. It saved lives. And that, I think, is the real payoff. Not revenge, not repayment, not even the apology that finally came years too late. The payoff is waking up every morning knowing I became exactly who I was meant to be, not because of them, but in spite of them. That's my story. And if anyone ever doubts the power of perseverance, I just smile and tell them, ask me about a demo CD and an empty college fund. I'll show you how losing everything can teach you how to build more than you ever dreamed. And so, life moved forward. The practice grew into something I could be proud of, not just a business, but a community. Patients brought me vegetables from their gardens, thank you cards scribbled in children's handwriting, homemade cookies at Christmas. They trusted me, not because of my degrees on the wall, but because I listened, because I cared, because I knew what it felt like to be dismissed. Every milestone I reached felt doubly sweet because I had carried myself there, paying off my first major chunk of student loans, hiring another nurse practitioner to lighten the load, signing the papers to purchase the building my clinic was in, turning rent into ownership. These weren't just achievements. They were victories over every single voice that once told me doctors were a dime a dozen. Trevor faded further into the background of my life, and honestly, I preferred it that way. He'd send the occasional text, a photo of his kid, a holiday greeting. I'd respond politely, but that was the extent of it. We weren't enemies anymore, but we weren't siblings either. We were acquaintances bound by a messy history neither of us wanted to relive. Gary's checks kept coming, slow but steady, and in some ways I think it gave him peace. He couldn't undo the damage, but he could chip away at the guilt. Every envelope that arrived felt like a small acknowledgement. We were wrong, you were right, and we know it now. As for Mom, her silence became permanent. Sometimes I wondered if she watched me from afar, if she read the articles in the local paper when my clinic hosted free vaccination drives, or if she ever drove past my office and thought about walking in. But she never did, and I stopped hoping she would. Some absences carve themselves so deep, you stop expecting them to be filled. The funny thing is, I don't feel empty. I feel whole, because somewhere along the line I realized that family isn't defined by who shares your blood. It's who shows up for you, who believes in you, who stands beside you when the world feels impossible. And I have that now, in friends, colleagues, patients who treat me like their own. If my father could see me now, I think he'd be proud, not just because I honored his dream for me, but because I did it with nothing but grit, stubbornness, and the refusal to give up. The demo CD still sits in that drawer, gathering dust. I never threw it away, not because it matters, but because it reminds me of one simple truth. They bet against me, and I won.